Hello and welcome to the British Sitcom History Podcast. This is part 2 of our look at Whoops Apocalypse, so if you haven't listened to part 1 yet, you probably should. We've already discussed the British contingent on the show, including Peter Jones, Geoffrey Palmer, Richard Davis, all sitcom heroes in their own respects. We still have other people to talk about, Richard Griffiths, for example. We've got Alexi Sale coming up in this episode as well. So without further delay, let's hit that big red button and get on with the show. Shall we move on to our American president and his advisor?
Let's go to the Oval Office. So we've got an interesting dynamic here. So the main two characters are the president, Johnny Cyclops, which is a great name, incidentally.
Comedy name.
I mean, yeah, that's like a sixth form name for a character, isn't it? Johnny Cyclops. Why would he be called Cyclops? Is he one-eyed? Is he not particularly far-sighted? He's got a very sort of vacant expression. There's like nothing going on behind the eyes, you know.
Yeah.
Then we've got his sort of chief of staff, who is the Deacon, and that's John Barron, very much in CJ mode from Reggie Perrin.
Yeah.
The idea is he's a sort of fundamentalist Christian, the power behind the throne, and he carries this enormous Bible and cross everywhere, and he's sort of actively wanting the apocalypse. You know, that's his vibe.
Racine and his blindfold lackwit are now being secretly ferried to Britain, where the Conservative government have pledged their safety until we can secretly smuggle them here to Washington. Did I know about this?
Of course, Mr. President.
Oh, thank you, Deacon.
This was interesting to me. So the first question, so John Barron, his accent's terrible. Like his American accent's really weak. The guy who plays Johnny Cyclops, is he actually American? Because there's something weird about his accent too.
So Barry Morse, interesting story, Barry Morse. He's not known for comedy really at all. I
don't know him at all. I've never seen him in anything else.
Well, this is his primary sort of sitcom credit. He is English, but he was like a working-class Cockney kid who got a scholarship to RADA when he was young, built his career up on the stage, but then somewhere along the lines ended up working in Canada, and I think his wife, who was also an actor, was of Canadian stock or something. They met in London, but, you know. And so, basically, his wife and 2 young children in the 50s decided to move to Canada, and he built his career there, doing work in Canada and America. He is best known because he was in the 1960s, or was it late 50s? But the early TV show of The Fugitive in America.
Ah, I see.
So you know the Harrison Ford film, it's based on that.
Yeah. I'm not going to say I remember the TV programme Fugitive, but I do remember it being a thing, you know, before the film came out.
So he was the cop chasing him. He was the Tommy Lee Jones character.
Okay.
And did an American accent and was then, at some point in the 70s, moved back to Britain, but was well known that he could do an American accent, and therefore he got all the American jobs. He was also quite well remembered. He was in the first series of Space 1999.
Right, okay.
Which was a British production, but with American actors trying to seem more American.
The guys who made the Thunderbirds, but this was live action rather than puppets.
Exactly. All Jerry Anderson was based in Britain. A lot of these American actors were like, oh, he was the voice of, you know, Alan Scott on Thunderbirds or whatever. Alan Tracy.
Alan Tracy. Scott Tracy. Don't stop getting Thunderbirds wrong.
Barry Morse, though, had the benefit of, obviously, working in America, had been a member of the Screen Actors Guild during the 50s, 60s. So he had lots of personal dealings with the president of the Screen Actors Guild, who was Ronald Reagan at the time.
Of course, yes.
So he had met and known Ronald Reagan to some extent, and so that perhaps...
well, I think that's what we're satirising here, isn't it? And again, I would remind you that this is very early in Ronald Reagan's presidency when this was made. So Reagan was president from 1981 to 1989. And it's interesting, I think, you know, he's seen in popular culture as this kind of fool, you know, like a little bit credulous, a bit like what we are satirising here.
Yeah.
A little bit stupid. I think that's unfair. People say he was a very good politician in that, you know, he was a great speaker, great communicator, and he'd been governor of California. It wasn't like he'd just sort of fallen out of an acting career. He'd been a politician for many years. And, you know, people really loved him. He was very popular. I think the image that we have of Reagan in popular culture is probably unfair. But nevertheless, that is what we are doing here. That's what Johnny Cyclops is. He's that vacant sort of non-person.
But it is, at least it's not like literally doing a Ronald Reagan impression. It is a kind of separate creation, but with that type. So I want to ask you a question here, because of something that happens later. When did Ronald Reagan get shot?
probably before this was made. It was in 1981. It's quite early in his presidency.
Right. The reason I ask that is because later in the series, Johnny Cyclops is shot, and it turns out to be a plot by the Deacon to try and raise his popularity.
Yeah.
I was wondering, was that a very specific gag on Reagan being shot, which is quite dark?
The truth is that I don't know. There's never been any sort of conspiracy theory that the CIA shot Ronald Reagan. but I wonder if there was talk at the time of how this had made him more popular, and perhaps it was a a bit like that trope of we'll start a war to win the next election kind of thing. Yes. I don't know that, but that feels like that rings fairly true.
Let's have a quick word about John Barron while we're here. As you said, he's best known as CJ in The Fall and Rise of Reginald Perrin.
I've seen him recently in Yes, Prime Minister a couple of times.
Yes. He was actually, before Reginald Perrin, he was in All Gas and Gators. He was a regular in that. Mm-hmm. And he did tend to play like vicars and religious types, authority figures.
Authority figure, that's good, yeah.
Yeah, and this kind of falls into that category. He was also, by the way, he was the president of Equity as well at this time. Yeah, he was sort of involved in all that. So he's got a political sense about him. But is this character he's playing here based on someone specifically, or is this more...
It's a good question. I'm not sure. I did a little bit of research on this because it wasn't obvious to me. And I feel like it's probably more of an amalgam of that kind of religious right that was very much on the march at that time in American politics, and we're sort of seen as pulling the strings behind the Republican Party. So I'm not sure he's based on an individual so much as a movement.
Yeah, and it obviously represents the right-wing religious nutters in American politics.
Yeah, absolutely, and he's a crazed Christian,
yeah,
a zealot.
And he has like a sharpened crucifix that he stabs things with.
Yeah, and did you, just in terms of John Barron's characterisation here, he never opens his eyes. It's like he's sort of at prayer. Everything he says is like an incantation to the Lord or something. It's a really interesting performance, actually. It's one note, like all the performances in this, but I kind of like the note.
Right, okay. I must admit I don't particularly care for the character performance. I think Barry Morse's Johnny Cyclops it kind of brings a sort of cuddleability to it. It's a sort of this sort of naive fool. I think it makes him nicer, and perhaps the Deacon has to be the opposite of that. But it's not a particularly pleasant character.
Conniving and scheming, and
it did make me think a little bit of Yes Minister. And that kind of dynamic of the kind of well-meaning politician and the machinations behind it all, but obviously without any of the nuance or subtlety. But while we're on the Americans, can we just jump to one of the later scenes in this episode in which they're dealing with the presidential campaign of Johnny Cyclops, the re-election campaign, and so they bring in a pair of... I don't know. Well, one of them's a car salesman, and the other one's a singer.
Yeah. So they bring in his re-election committee, a sort of older guy who is not an older guy, but he's a middle-aged guy who is the campaign manager, and it's just a slick car salesman type approach. And then they've got to represent the young people. They've got a guy with a guitar called Biff. Who plays Biff, Alan?
Rick Mayall.
Rick Mayall. This is not a Rick Mayall performance, is it?
Well, this is Rick Mayall pre The Young Ones. This was Rick Mayall on the up. He was a known thing.
He's acting. He's playing a sort of surly, early 20s musician. And, I'm not going to say it's a great performance, but what I mean is it's not his usual over-the-top, hello, I'm Rick Mayall performance.
Yes, that is correct. Let's talk about that a bit later when we go to the film as well. But yes, here he is just playing a surly kind of character. And they do a song. They wear coonskin caps and do a Davy Crockett song. They casually drop the N-word in there.
The song is bad. It's got the N-word in it, which isn't great. So who knew there was footage on television of Rick Mayall using the N-word? But, I mean, that's not the worst thing about it. It's just a terrible, sixth form song. Hang on a minute. That is the worst thing about it. That absolutely is the worst thing about it. But it's not the only bad thing about it.
Johnny Cyclops never started World War III. Who faked his tax returns and laughed at the law? Authorized a cover-up in 1954. And who spends a night a week in bed with a whore? Not Johnny Cyclops, that's for sure.
I know what you mean. There's a lot of stuff in here that smacks of improv troupe, and I can be a lot more forgiving of an improv troupe that are just throwing things out off the top of their head. This is
on the television.
This is a drafted, scripted thing that's been rehearsed, and it should be better.
Yeah. There's also a bit in this scene about the Q bomb, which is the quark bomb. It's a new weapon. And as we go through the series, the quark bomb is the sort of inciting MacGuffin that creates all the tension. But what's quite interesting here is that they want to call it the Johnny Cyclops bomb. And the idea is that this will help we'll announce it during the primaries, it'll really help his re-election campaign. Johnny Cyclops, naive fool that he is, has got enough about him to say, hang on a minute, I'm not sure I want the most destructive force ever created to have my name on it. which is an interesting take, because, he's right, but that feels like something he would be overridden on.
Yeah.
But later on, when we see the bomb, it's got Q-bomb stenciled on it. And sort of, it did have Johnny Cyclops bomb stenciled on it, which has been painted over, but badly.
Yeah.
Actually, just before we move away from the Oval Office, there's one more scene at the end of the episode where we go back to the Oval Office. And there's a John Barron line, which I just want to quote.
Okay.
If the good Lord had meant us to panic, he wouldn't have given us clean trousers. Now, Alan, my question is this. What does that mean? that doesn't work as a joke.
If you panic, you shit yourself.
Yeah, but we've got clean trousers, so it don't matter. The joke doesn't work. It's a crap joke. It would be a crap joke if it worked. It doesn't. It infuriated me. By this point in the episode, I was already annoyed. And I was like, that is not a joke. It has the structure of a joke. It has the cadence of a joke. It is not funny. It doesn't work. Hey, listen, that's all my notes on the episode I've gone through now. But I tell you what we haven't talked about. We haven't talked about the Kremlin, the Russian...
simply because they're not in this episode, but...
no, they're not.
Yeah, let's address them.
Can we go over to the Kremlin and discuss Richard Griffiths as the infirm leader of the Soviet Union?
Yes. Premier Dubyenkin, his character is called. Yeah, we are introduced to the character. He's having a meeting with the American ambassador, sort of talking with that, and he says, this is the first time we have met. And the American says, no, we've met 278 times, sir.
Yes. Russia is a great country.
Yes. Yes, sir.
A very great country. Food riots, what are they?
Actually,
Just because I have a dead dog in my fridge proves nothing.
You're refused.
Why shouldn't I have a dead dog in my fridge if I want to?
It's a free country, sir.
But then later on, in the scene, he wanders over to get a drink, has a sort of quite a badly acted heart attack, and collapses to the ground, and is immediately replaced by an exact copy, who then walks in and doesn't remember the first half of the conversation. So that's a recurring joke that happens several times, that he dies and is replaced with a clone, I guess? Or is it supposed to be a lookalike? What's the idea?
I don't know. It's
a bit early for cloning, isn't it?
I thought, okay, what they're satirising here is the interchangeability of the Soviet Union's succession of leaders during the 80s.
It's not. It's the exact same person.
When I was a kid, Brezhnev was the guy. Brezhnev is who Dubyenkin is. He's got the big eyebrows and everything. He's obviously Brezhnev. Brezhnev died in November 1982, and he was replaced by a guy called Andropov. Andropov died just over a year later, February 84, and replaced by a guy called Chernenko. And just over a year after that, Chernenko died and Gorbachev took over. So in my memory, as a kid, there was like a new leader of the Soviet Union every year. There was this old man and he died and was replaced by another one. So I thought, that's what they're satirising. But they're not, because this was made before Brezhnev died. So I don't know what the hell they're doing. Are they saying that Brezhnev is immortal? I don't get it. I don't know, Alan. What are they saying?
There is definitely the gag of all the top Soviets are old and decrepit and dying old men.
And interchangeable?
Well, that in general, because when they have a kind of a board meeting and they're all there, they're all like these old men, and so that is definitely a bit. And then there's a whole bit where they're all kept in freezers, like that's keeping them alive or something. So is this the idea that this is a lookalike, or is it a clone?
I don't know, mate. I don't know. I got nothing here. I got nothing. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's what I suppose this is an advance on the other bits of biting satire that we've been saying are so ridiculous. At least we don't get this, which is an advance, I suppose, and that being really obvious.
So let me ask you, how do you feel about Richard Griffiths' performance as a Russian?
It's excruciating.
Is there a good way to do a sort of comedy Russian? I am doing the accent, and you. I think as much as you can do.
I mean, that you're an actor. That's better.
It's a tough one to do, and I there's a scene I particularly enjoy where it's with him and Jeffrey Palmer, and he's going, "See, we have steak, and I promise you, this is not the only one."
That's quite funny.
Touch the steak. and Jeffrey Palmer just sort of deadpans the whole thing. It's really good. He goes, "Look, this is our nation's delicacy, salt. Everybody loves salt. Try." And he makes him eat the salt. I like that scene. It really works.
See, your accent there, that was a bit Dracula, what you just did there. You sounded like the Count on Sesame Street by the end of that sentence.
I'm doing Sacha Baron Cohen as Dracula.
Yeah.
But do you know what? I looked into Richard Griffiths for this, as I normally do. And it was not what I expected. Do you know anything about Richard Griffiths?
So, so Richard Griffiths is obviously your man, Uncle Dudley from Harry Potter, isn't he? That's anybody who's in Harry Potter, when they die, it's Harry Potter actor, Richard Griffiths dies. Yeah. But he was in a thing called Pie in the Sky, which I remember, which was a sort of comedy drama, not a sitcom, certainly. Yeah. The big thing is Withnail and I, that was the film. Obviously, I'm the right age. I loved Withnail and I can quote the whole damn thing. So that's sort of what I know Richard Griffiths from. Yeah,
I would say that as well. The History Boys is obviously one of his big... was his
a little
big
after my time.
Well.
I've seen that, but yeah.
But definitely in my head, quite a posh, upper-class kind of guy, right?
Yeah.
So he is not that at all. He's from the Northeast. Now, that alone does not stop you from being posh, but, put it this way, his dad fought in pubs for money, so...
Oh, wow.
That's quite working class,
bare knuckle brawler type thing.
Yeah, and he studied drama at Manchester Polytechnic, so it's not like he was, a RADA or anything like that.
Right, okay.
But yeah, he built up his reputation in theatre, and for whatever reason, I guess he just looked the part or could do the
When was
voice.
he? How old is he? Because he's one of those guys, I think, I always thought he was older than he actually is. When was he born?
1947. So he's, 34 here?
Yeah, not as old as you think, yeah.
He's obviously made up to look, But this is the sort of thing he was doing at that time. Occasional bit of TV. He was pretty well established in theatre, but, he's playing character roles. But, he was building a reputation, and the next step of that is Withnail and I, which really falls into the same category. It's a good character part in a relatively small budget film, but it was...
Withnail and I has got lucky in the sense that it's a lot more famous than it sort of should be because, it's just a small film, wasn't it?
And it gave him a real cult status. But actually, just before this, he did a sitcom called Nobody's Perfect, in which he was one of the leads. He was like the male lead in that. So that was kind of what he was doing sitcom-wise. And then... in 1987, he was in Fizz, which we talked about recently because it was written by Richard Fagan and Andrew Norris. After Chance in a Million, it was their follow-up.
It was the two characers at the wedding that they'd spun off. Yes,
exactly.
I remember that. Yes.
I say, I've been replaced by Richard Griffiths.
John's having an impression, everyone. Well done.
Then he was in a show called A Kind of Living as well from 1988 to 90, which I don't really know anything about. Pie in the Sky is the 90s. Again, it wasn't really a sitcom, but it was a sort of light-hearted, one of those kind of detective, one of those I'm a chef, but also I solve murders kind of shows. But yeah, Harry Potter was sort of one of those things that made him, again, much more better known, internationally speaking. And then The History Boys, which was, I think, 2006 was when the original play, and the film was in 2008.
He was in the play as well?
Yes, he originated the role. I think it might have been written for him, actually.
Is that Alan Bennett wrote that?
Yeah. And Francis de la Tour's in it, of course. So they all that was another one of those kind of relatively small things which went much bigger and kind of had a bit of American success and all that. So, he went to Broadway and did the show there and won a Tony Award and all that kind of stuff.
Great.
Here's the only other sort of sitcom thing I found for him was TLC. Do you remember that? It's 2002. It was set in a hospital.
I don't remember that at all.
Alexander Armstrong and Reece Shearsmith. It was sort of like the next thing he did after the League of Gentlemen. It just did one series. This is sort of a sideline, but I looked it up. I was like, I've seen bits and pieces of it, and I remember it a little bit. And I looked up the writer. I was like, I wonder what else he's done. And his credits are TLC as the writer, and the only other credits he has is as the creator of The Weakest Link.
Oh, wow.
What a career, eh?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
odd. So, whatever that life is, I guess he retired.
I bet he made a lot of money out of that.
Retired of it. Because, I mean, they've sold that around the world, haven't they? It's like he's the creator. Anyway, that's Richard Griffiths. Yeah, definitely not the sort of history I expected there. Hey, here's another thing. It says in the 1970s he was married to a woman, and I was like, oh... And I don't know, Richard Griffiths, is he gay? I honestly don't know, but I think because of Uncle Monty and the History Boys, I think he's gay. Maybe that's the only reason. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a testament to his acting, shall we say.
It is. I also thought he was Russian, but that's... But yeah, okay, so Richard Griffiths now is one of the more recognisable faces here, but at the time, was a relatively just obscure character actor who was always keen to kind of, yes, I can do a bit of Russian for you. And there are some scenes in this that are in Russian of a kind, but certainly they are not in English.
Is it Russian? I wondered about that, actually. Obviously, my Russian's a little bit rusty, so I couldn't be certain.
I think it's sort of cod Russian, like not a good translation, but a sort of like definitely some of the words are correct and that sort of thing. But speaking of Russian characters, we do, of course, have another Russian character played by someone who was establishing himself as the Eastern European actor de jour, Alexei Sayle.
Alexei Sayle. So, yeah, Alexei Sayle plays a sort of, what is he, like an undercover sort of spy, KGB type character, isn't he?
Yes. Commissar Solzhenitsyn, no relation, is the name. And, he's the one doing the torturing of some... this American couple that have been captured. Yeah,
there's a whole subplot about this. They're trying to get this American couple out, and they're threatening with the Q bomb, and
kind of goes nowhere.
It's all a nonsense.
Yeah. So Alexei Sayle, then, you may well remember from our previous discussions that Marshall and Renwick were the primary writers, along with Alexei Sayle, on Alexei Sayle's stuff.
Alexei Sayle's stuff.
Obviously, that came several years later. But they wrote this part for him, and they knew him just from his comedy work. This is before The Young Ones Remember, which is where he kind of made his name as a vaguely Eastern European character. And so they just knew that his style of characterization would work for this. And
that shows how plugged in they were to alternative comedy then, because at the time, he was hosting the new alternative comedy night at the Comedy Store in London.
Yeah.
He was comparing that, bringing all these new acts through, and he was very much at the forefront of that movement.
And that was the place to be if you're young, hip writers in the comedy world. And let's remember that although they were 10 years in at this point, Marshall and Renwick were 27 and 30 years old at this point. They were the younger generation. They just were working with the older generation. But yeah, so this is Alexei Sayle's, one of his very early kind of proper acting jobs.
He did a lot of acting, didn't he, Alexei Sayle? I mean, in the 80s and 90s, he tried his hand at what you'd call dramatic acting. I don't think he had much of a range, but it wasn't all comedy.
I mean, the characterization here is very firmly within sketch comedy territory. It's not good acting. And the set pieces that he does feel like just set sketches that are very largely disconnected to everything else. And he's a kind of comedy torturer, I guess, is the vibe we're going with here. Slapstick torture. Again, another bit that, as it's introduced, he's talking to his lackey and he says like, oh, do I look okay? Everything's fine. My tie's straight and there's nothing in my teeth and that sort of thing. And the guy's going, yeah, and there's nothing else, is there? And the guy kind of looks at this obvious wig he's wearing and then kind of goes, no, nothing's wrong. But again, it just doesn't fly as a joke. There's something about
doesn't work.
The timing's off, or it needs to see the eye line or something. But things like that just don't play. Yeah, so over the course of this, there's lots of torture scenes, but it always goes wrong in some comedic way. And that's it, really, isn't it? That's about what you're going to get.
I mean, like I say, I don't think Alexei Sayle's the best actor in the world, but this seems well within his range. And he's still not doing a great job, but I don't think that's his fault. I think this is just indicative of the whole thing,
Yes. So those are all the characters apart from...
We are missing one major character, which is John Cleese as L'Acrobat, the master criminal, the celebrity assassin.
Yeah, so again, going back to our idea of mixing the old with the new, the 60s satire boom with the 80s alternative comedy, and Marshall and Renwick being the glue between them. But really the glue between them is Humphrey Barclay. Humphrey Barclay, who was very much established within that world and was a producer and was closely associated with the likes of John Cleese. It's Humphrey Barclay who could get John Cleese to read the script. John Cleese still had to like it.
I'm surprised that Cleese did it, though. It's hard to think. In 1982, what was he doing? He was after first series of Fawlty Towers? No, it was after both series of Fawlty Towers, right?
Yeah.
So it was before he went to Hollywood and Brock America. But yeah, like it just seems like an odd thing for John Cleese to do. But then, ultimately he's a sketch comedian at heart, isn't he?
I think yes. I think this basically, if you go to John Cleese and say you'll be able to do 8 silly characters, and you will give you quite a bit of freedom to play around with them.
He did seem like he was having a lot of fun, didn't he?
And it's all going to be pre-recorded. You don't have to come into rehearsals or anything. We'll shoot all your stuff in 3 days, and then that's it. So I suspect that was part of it. I don't think he would have been turning up to rehearsals for like a week and then recording on a Sunday and all that.
Fair enough. Well, the character is a master of disguise, which is great because it allows John Cleese to have 8? Was it 8? Did you say goes at racism?
Something like that, yeah.
No, the characterizations are all very stereotypical, shall we say?
I think John Cleese does a really good job, though. I think there is a way to do that.
Do you know what he does? He does. He looks like he's having fun, and in the context of this show, he's probably the best thing in it.
Yeah. And there is a way to do that in a very kind of broad, crap way, stereotyped way. But he brings enough character and little funny, quirky traits to it to make it feel like there's some sense of a rounded character there, and you're not just relying on a funny accent and teeth.
Yeah.
Occasionally relies on the teeth, but
and hair. So some funny hair as well.
Yeah. And so we get all sorts of wacky business with him, but basically what he's doing is he has stolen the bomb and he is transporting it to, I think he's going to give it to the Russians. The idea being that he's trying to spark conflict is what he's doing.
I can't remember what his motivation was at all. I've no idea.
But the gag is that he's hiding this huge bomb, and he has to hide it in a numerous silly ways, such as a giant penis.
Oh, yeah. And how we laughed. Do you know what this is satirising? L'Acrobat?
Carlos the Jackal?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
But I don't really know much more than that.
Late 70s, early 80s was the golden age of the celebrity terrorist. Here's your classic Carlos the Jackal biography. He was born in Venezuela, Venezuelan Marxist revolutionary. So obviously, Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, international Marxist. So that was his main crew. Then he hung out with the Baader-Meinhof crew, which were the German Marxist terrorists. Then he went independent. This is great. He got funding in his years. He got funding from the Stasi in East Germany, Ceausescu in Romania, Saddam Hussein, and Colonel Gaddafi. I mean, that is a greatest hits, isn't it? But he also was part of the Armenian Secret Army for the Liberation of Armenia. And he is... Do you know what he's doing now? Still alive?
Oh, really? Oh, no, I don't.
3 life sentences, that's what he's doing now. The French wanted him because he was charged with the murders of 2 French police, plus a former accomplice. So I think it was somebody who was, had turned. But really, the French wanted him because he planted a load of train bombs in the 80s. But I don't think they could pin that on him. They got him for these police officers. But yeah, there's that famous picture of Carlos the Jackal. If you Google Carlos the Jackal, the first image you'll see is that bespectacled terrorist. And yeah, that's what John Cleese is doing here. He's that celebrity terrorist, master of disguise. No one knows what he really looks like.
And like you say, he looks like he's having a lot of fun.
He does.
And this is John Cleese's only regular sitcom character outside of Fawlty Towers. British, that is. He does do some American stuff. But John Cleese is not a regular character in any other British sitcom.
No, he's not.
So, this is notable in his career, certainly. For Marshall and Renwick, they were huge fans of Monty Python and John Cleese particularly, so it was a big thing for them.
Yeah. We've sort of reached the end of the episode and the end of our conversation, but I know you want to talk about the film, because there was a film called Whoops Apocalypse a few years later by the same writers. So tell us the genesis of that and just give us the background. Okay,
yeah, so after the series went out, it was not a huge success by any means. It got sort of medium reviews, mixed reviews. Some people quite liked it, but I think it was one of those things that it found its audience, and it wasn't going to pick up any new viewers, because if you've missed the first couple of episodes, it's not like you can just jump in and understand what's happening. So it found whatever its audience was and then stuck with that. There was actually a tie-in book as well, which was more a precursor, sort of giving backstories on the characters and stuff like that. And just to give you a bit more kind of history of the show, it was sold internationally to some extent, and it was bought for American distribution by the Playboy channel, which was a subscription channel, because they were trying to diversify.
And it has got some tits in it. So.
Yeah, so that's good. But here's an interesting little thing. And again, I want to credit Jonathan Sloman, the booklet that he wrote, because he's poured through the archives and just found all the information you could possibly get, really. So this is quite interesting stuff. It was repeated on Channel 4 in 1984 because at the time Channel 4 were buying up a lot of LWT properties to fill their schedules, really. A relatively new channel they were.
Right.
I thought that was quite interesting. And Barry Morse, in his diaries, notes that he got £12,000 for the Channel 4 repeats.
Wow, okay.
As repeat fee, which seems like a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah. When we watched Chance in a Million, Angus McKay in his diaries was saying he'd earned like, what was it, 450 quid or something?
Yeah, something like that. I guess this
like a big step up.
Barry Morse was the lead. Plus, part of the budget here was that these actors weren't kind of sitcom actors, so you were having to kind of bring them down to your level and pay them well for it.
Okay.
So maybe that's part of it. But yes, what happened is one particular person by the name of Brian Eastman, who was a producer, he saw the TV show and thought, "This is a film. This is a through narrative. The pacing would work better as a film. This is a film, and I'm a film producer. I'm going to make this happen." And it does seem to be just a labour of love of this one person. Like, no one was demanding it particularly, but he was just convinced that this material would work well as a film. Bought the rights, got Marshall and Renwick to write a script, and didn't want a film version of the series, but wanted, like, take this idea and make a film of it. Let's change things
so
up.
it's not the same, is it? We watched the film the other night, and it's not the same at all. It's obviously got the same themes, but it's not a remake.
There's a kind of the core concept. A couple of the characters are very similar, but yeah, it is different, which is why we're kind of talking about it here now rather than doing it as a sort of separate spin-off film. It's not a spin-off film. Eastman was a producer. His company, they did make sort of some small-scale TV, but they were primarily doing adverts, and that was where the money is, I guess. They did produce a sitcom for Channel 4, which we briefly talked about when we did Please Sir, because it was a John Alderton vehicle called Father's Day.
Okay, yeah, I remember talking about it.
So they produced that, and then so basically the reason the film came out 4 years later is because that's how long it took to find the funding and make this happen. At one point they were connected with John Cleese's company, Video Arts,
making management training videos.
Well, they had a feature film arm of their company, and they were in line to put some money for it. And also, they wanted John Cleese to play the Prime Minister, and I think he wanted to do it, but it just sort of didn't work out in whatever way. There was an attempt to get some American money, so they then kind of rewrote the script to kind of boost the American side of things. And although they didn't get the American money, that rewrite helped them get. Basically, it was Lou Grade's ITC. That was who made it. Okay. Budget of £2.8 million. Is
that a lot?
I don't know. It's not a cheap-looking film, but I guess all location stuff you're trying to do. The director they found was a guy called Tom Busman. He was a commercials director with a very high pedigree of commercials, but had never directed a feature before and never did again.
Oh dear. So that was his big break.
Yeah, the whole thing's a bit pieced together, but ultimately it did get made. And what happened in the meantime, Gareth, between the series and the film was the Falklands War. And so the film is a little bit more kind of tailored with that in mind rather than kind of the real Cold War. And it's really playing on the jingoistic nature of the British response to the Falklands War. And our Prime Minister character here, which is played by Peter Cook, is this mad but jingoistic type.
Again, it's slightly different, but it's still pretty blunt with the satire, isn't it? He literally crucifies a political opponent.
Yes, and one of those kind of funnier bits, but again, it's a gag, it's a sketch that you would see on a satirical sketch show. The Prime Minister comes up with this great scheme to cut down unemployment. We're going to get employed people and get them to jump off a cliff so that then unemployed people can take their jobs. And that will cut unemployment.
Yeah.
And then you see, and it's Ken Jones, in fact, kind of going, "Oh, I'm proud to do my bit.
Nice to see Ken Jones.
Proud to do my bit, sir. I'll jump off this cliff for you." That, as a sketch, is fine. It works. It's nice.
Yeah.
But does it work within a bigger whole of a film? I don't know. Yeah, the film itself is as sort of unbalanced as the show, I guess. I think I prefer the film, honestly. I think I prefer it.
I definitely
don't know, it's
prefer
controversial.
the film. I definitely prefer the film, but that's because I really didn't like the television program. But let's talk about Rick Mayall, because we mentioned this earlier. So Rick Mayall is in the film playing the captain of the SAS team.
Yes.
So they do a very similar thing. It's not a ferry this time, but it's the same principle. They're going in and storming. They're looking for the kidnapped princess or something. Doesn't really matter, but the point is they go in all guns blazing, kill everybody. And so Rick Mayall is now playing the leader of that crew, and it's a much more Rick Mayall role than Biff in the TV series.
It is, and I hated that bit. It's Rig mail is a weapon that needs to be very precisely operated, and this is not it. The problem is that's whole bit. It's like a 15-minute scene when it should be a 2-minute sketch. Yeah. And it goes on way too long. It's just the same thing over and over again. And Rig mail shouting, and that's it. It's not funny. It's not... And it caps off the show. It sort of finishes the film. It's like it's supposed to be this big topper, and it's kind of disconnected from everything else. It's not good enough. It doesn't pull the plot together. It's crap.
I agree. Welcome aboard.
And then you got Alexei Sayle turns up in the film again as a different character. Again, both of these people now, because of the young ones, were much bigger stars, and so they got bigger roles. Alexei Sayle, quite a nice bit where this Russian... Well, no, it's not Russian. It's we are Americans, and we love... we are very busy in hotel. We cannot take any customers. But it's a nice little bit, again, just in itself as a little comedy sketch. It's fine.
Yeah. Can I just ask a question that I haven't thought about before now? Alexei Sayle often plays like that East European Russian type character. Is that because his name's Alexei?
Yes.
Like, he's not Russian. I know he might have that sort of back a couple of generations, but he's from Liverpool. It's just because of his name, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, his mother's Lithuanian or whatever, and his parents were communists, so they gave him a communist-ish name. And that's what more do you want?
Well, there you go.
So we have some other actors in here. Loretta Swit plays the president of America.
Oh, yeah. Loretta Swit off of MASH.
Off of MASH, yeah. And she is rather the straight character here. She's the sort of normal one in the insane world. But right at the beginning, it's played for laughs that the president, the actual president, dies, and he's a former clown, and so there's kind of a bit of wackiness with his funeral,
That's
which
dreadful.
Just, again, doesn't add anything to anything.
Clown car at the president's funeral. Yeah.
But that means she's the vice president who becomes president by default, and I don't know why that is. Why not just have her as the president?
I mean, it's Gerald Ford. So Nixon is the last president to have, well, not died in office, he resigned, where a vice president took over. So Nixon was, can we say he was a clown? I wouldn't say he was a clown particularly as a characterization. Ford took over, and Ford then lost the subsequent election to Jimmy Carter. So Ford is kind of seen by history as a bit of a lame duck type thing.
Well, there's certainly a scene where the president goes to see the former president, ask him advice, and that is a Nixon.
That's Nixon, yes.
And
he's on a chain gang.
And he's on a chain gang, that's the joke.
Yeah.
Perfectly fine. But yeah, interesting that the president is a woman. That seemed to be a choice that the writers made as a kind of like, well, this is where things are going. Women are starting to get into politics. Let's get ahead of the game. But that's not really played as a joke in any way. It's just, she's just a president. No. The other thing is Ian Richardson, who plays a naval officer on the British side of things, who is a gay character, and in the introduction of his character, he's in a gay relationship, and that's not really played for laughs either. It's certainly it's sort of played for a laugh, as in you're not expecting it, but it's certainly not played for a laugh at the expense of homosexuals or in a camp, stupid kind of traditional comedy way.
Do you know what? That is interesting, Alan, because I think now, if you've got a TV program now and it happens that this character's gay, it's no big deal, and just he's got a partner and it's fine. In 1986, that would have been a thing. That would have been noteworthy. And I don't know if that's it. The joke is, he's a naval officer, he's prim and proper, he's establishment, but look, I think that might be it.
But it doesn't feel like they're making a joke of it, does it? It doesn't feel like a heavy-handed kind of joke.
No, you're right.
Yeah, so anyway, it was interesting, it was notable, I suppose. And I quite liked the way this ended with Ian Richardson, if I'm going to spoil it slightly for anyone who's not seen it.
I won't worry about it, it's rubbish.
The whole point is that it's whoops, apocalypse, and the final strike of that is the fact that he has been hypnotized at some point as part of a kind of stage show for the troops. And that just seems like a bit of comedy business. And then right at the end, it comes back when they need him to make a decision, and he accidentally triggers him into thinking there's a fire, and so he shouts fire, and they fire the nuclear warhead when they've been told not to. And I quite liked that. It was really in keeping with the whoops apocalypse in a really good comedic way that I felt that I didn't see coming, and that I like that. And I guess we should also talk about the one thing that we haven't talked about the film is that Lacrobat, the character played by John Cleese, does return in rather the same fashion, pretty much the same
This
concept.
is fascinating to me. Played by, go on,
Michael Richards.
Kramer off of Seinfeld.
Yeah.
Amazingly bad performance.
Pre-Seinfeld, of course.
It's terrible.
Well, Michael Richards obviously was an up-and-coming comedian. He was a stand-up. He went on to be in Seinfeld as a wacky character. So this is what he was doing, character comedy, and they auditioned for it, and he came in and was, I do loads of different voices and faces, yeah. I guess he doesn't have the charm that John Cleese brings to it, but, he's doing the bits, he's doing the characters. I don't know, what more do you want? I don't know what are you supposed to bring to this?
I don't know. I haven't got notes. I'm just like, it was lame. It was just all lame. Do you know what? Like I said, the film, I didn't find the film as lame as I found the TV show. But specifically Lacrobat, I did. I didn't enjoy it. It all felt very childish.
I felt like in general, the film, the pacing was a lot better, with the exception of the end scene with the SAS. I thought everything was just kind of a little bit more kind of on top of things and felt less sketchy. Although it is quite sketchy.
Yeah, I felt it felt more narrative, but yeah, not perfect by any means.
So let me do you a couple of little roundup things about what happened afterwards. Brian Eastman continued to be a producer. He went on to produce the Poirot series, with Suchet. Both David Renwick and Andrew Marshall wrote episodes of Poirot separately. Which I found interesting, especially as David Renwick went on to write a very well-known detective series, Jonathan Creek. Mm-hmm. But together, they did go on to do other things as well. Alexei Sayle's stuff, as we talked about. But they also made Hot Metal, which the first series starred Jeffrey Palmer. The second series starred Richard Wilson, who was in the film version of Whoops Apocalypse, and of course went on to be One Foot in the Grave, Victor Meldrew. Apparently, again, I'll credit Jonathan Sloman here. This is a little tidbit in his book. So in the film, Richard Wilson is crucified, as you do. And it was during the filming of that, which was a bit difficult, and he was just basically annoyed and being a bit irascible. And David Renwick was like, this is interesting. An irascible old man. So, that was where he sort of saw what he wanted to see there.
Yeah.
The only other thing they did was a sitcom called If You See God, Tell Him, which was actually written a few years early but not made until 1993. Richard Briers, Adrian Edmondson.
Ah, yes.
But interesting, I read about Marshall Renwick's writing style in that they would kind of throw ideas together and then go away and write things and then come back. So they would kind of go off and write sketches and then come back, and David Renwick would sort of just try and structure them together, which works for sketch, but not so much for sitcom, does it? That's writing style.
No. That's why that might lead to a disjointed narrative.
Yeah. And they didn't make a conscious decision to stop writing together. They just kind of had successes on their own, so they got busy doing other things. We know David Renwick obviously went on to do One Foot in the Grave, and eventually Jonathan Creek are sort of the two main things on his resume. Andrew Marshall, his big hit was 2.4 Children.
It was about the same time as One Foot in the Grave, wasn't it? They were both sort of through the
91
90s.
It started, and through to 99. He also did a show called Health and Efficiency, which also starred Gary Olson.
I've watched a bit of that. It's a hospital drama. It's not great, but it's quite broad. It's the sort of thing that you can imagine being on at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday night on ITV.
He also did Dad with George Cole and Kevin McNally, 97 to 99.
What you did after Minder.
Yeah, and then, a couple of things since then, but that seems to be the 90s was his heyday. More recently, though, Andrew Marshall has teamed up with Rob Grant, and they've been writing together stuff for the radio. Just one last little bit of sitcom trivia here. Apparently, it was during the filming of one of the episodes of Whoops Apocalypse, Alexei Sayle invited a few friends to come and watch it. I'm recording this thing, come and have a look. And two of them were Dawn French and Lenny Henry. Got sat next to each other.
That's where they met. Are you going to tell me that's where they met?
Got chatting and got on, let's go for a drink, and then etc. etc. And that's how they met, apparently, through Alexei Sayle.
Oh, that's a nice story. That's a nice way to finish, because I've been pretty negative for the last 2 hours, so that's a nice way to finish. Actually, so what do you think of, let's summarise Whoops Apocalypse. I mean, obviously, I didn't like it. I don't think you did either, but give us a bit of a summary of your thoughts.
it's not even easy to watch. Like you can have sitcoms that are a bit crap or samey, but they just fly by, and these don't. It does feel like you're watching a heavy-handed sketch show that does have some kind of plot tying it all together, but doesn't feel like that strong. But I feel like if it was a sketch show and I was watching it as a sort of a cheap thrown together sketch show with comedians trying to act, I'd be a lot more forgiving of it. But it feels like it should be a lot better than it is, given what they're putting into it. But what I really enjoy about this is the history of it, the context of it. It's obviously very set in place in terms of its satire and what it's looking at in the world, but in its place in kind of the world of British comedy, that connection between the old school and the new school, I find that really interesting. And bear in mind, this is like, 6 months or something before The Young Ones, which you would kind of really see as the beginning of that anarchic punk rock alternative sitcoms. But this has got a lot of those ingredients there. It's just kind of not committing
I think
to
you've
it.
made a good point there about the satire of... So when this was... A couple of times as we've been talking about it, I've said, this feels like a satire of such and such that happened in 1983 or 1984. It was before that. So it's really interesting as a... It's probably a bit grand. It's really interesting as a piece of history to see where it sits in that timeline. So I'm looking at it in the larger context, not just the comedy context. How it's satirizing the American presidency, how it's satirizing the Kremlin. I think that's fascinating. But I also think it's really bad. I think it's not funny. Another point is there's no tension. Like, we've talked before about how I felt that nuclear terror throughout the 1980s, basically. There was this constant drumbeat of the bomb might drop at any minute, and that was sort of underpinned my childhood. Do you remember when we watched that episode of Only Fools and Horses where they build a bomb shelter?
Yeah.
I was like, that got to me. That pulled some primal fear out of me. This didn't at all. This is about nuclear apocalypse, and there was no tension in it. There was no fear in it, which speaks to how shoddy it is.
I think you're very right, and I hadn't really thought about that. But yeah, no, I hadn't. The stakes are not there, are they, at all? The fact that the world is going to end, even though it is very clearly stated, does not feel like an imminent threat. You are very correct there, and perhaps that's what it really needs. But you're also correct that I did not laugh at any point, I don't think. So that's not a good sign, is it? I don't know, is it worth revisiting? It's a curiosity, really, rather than like something you're going to rediscover. But yeah, it's certainly one for the historians rather than the comedy fans, perhaps.
I tell you what, if our listeners are thinking about watching it, I would suggest watch the film. You probably get more out of the film than you will out of the series. That's not a ringing endorsement, but it's probably worth an hour and a half of your time.
Yes, and just to let you know what we're going to be doing next week, if you want to get ahead of us, it is Desmond's, the early 90s classic. A very different vibe for what we've been talking about today, so it'd be interesting to get stuck into that one. In the meantime, you can get in touch with us on our social media. We are on Instagram and Twitter at BritComPod. You can find us on Facebook if you search for British Sitcom History Podcast.
Thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll see you next week.
Bye!
Bye!